Okay, hi everyone. So we're going to be having a look at how to structure a literature essay. This is something that I get asked about quite a lot. So I thought it would be something that would be quite good to have a look at because there's a few different kind of ways of approaching it that I don't necessarily always discuss in class. I thought I kind of set them out. And it's actually quite helpful for me actually to kind of see, it kind of written down a few different kind of methods and how we approach it. But if you could just write down the title and then have a think about how can we connect these two images to structuring an essay. You might have seen things like this on Instagram, quite annoying usually to see, but there is a reason why I picked them. So write down the title and then have a go, press pause, have a think. Why have I bothered to pick these images? How can we connect these to structuring an essay? Okay. Okay, so I picked these images. These are actually from a photographer and his girlfriend, and they travel the world, and she kind of like leads him by the hand in these images. But I picked this because when I was at university, I remember I was struggling with an essay, and someone who I knew said, you've just got to pretend as though you're leading the examiner by the hand through your essay. And I'd never really thought about it, in that way before. I'd never really thought about the relationship between, me structuring the essay and the examiner in that way, and me building it for them to be able to clearly be led through it. So actually that was a really, really useful analogy for me, and that's something that I've carried with me to now. So we really want to think about, from when you're starting this this video, I want you to be channeling that you are leading them through by the hand through your essay, and that's going to go through when you're systematically planning. I'm going to talk about this, then this, then this. There needs to be a specific order to it, depending on what you want to do, which is what we're going to talk about now. Okay, so just start off with, can you make a mind map on your page, please? And can you write down what do you think makes a good essay? Okay, so all the things that you can think of that make a good essay. Okay, hit pause and then write down as many as you can. Give yourself maybe 60 seconds, as many as you can. Okay, right. So then, the very first thing is that it answers the question. I ask this question, sometimes in my classes, and I'm like, what makes a good essay? And you'd be surprised by the lack of people that say answers the question. If you haven't written down, please make sure you write down now. The primary purpose for an essay is to answer the question that you've been set. An essay is just an extended argument, that's been written down. You're literally arguing your points based on the question. I'm sure that many of you, if you're asked something, about in the news or something, relevant to you, you'd be able to argue it. It's literally just a written argument. Okay, so it's got to answer the question. Relevant quotes are included. We are going to talk about in a minute that you don't necessarily have to include quotes, but obviously we'd always recommend it, but we'll move on to that in a second. These quotes are analysed clearly and in depth in order to form ideas and interpretations in response to the question. Contextual information that is used to inform these ideas and interpretations. There's a well-structured, clear and coherent argument. I don't know why that one's appeared then. There's a clear understanding of the effect on the reader. Okay, so there's that, the readers, having this relationship with the text. I've talked about it in my other videos, like reader response. How does the reader respond to the text? What is their, interpretation? You being the reader. And then last and not least, something that, as I said, we're focusing on today, is leading the marker through our argument carefully and with purpose. It's got to be, a thought process behind it. That's why planning is so important. I have so many students say, I don't want to plan, I'm just going to get straight into it, which I understand. I sometimes used to want to do that, but even if you just take 30 seconds to jot down your ideas, I guarantee you your essay will be, better formulated. But I just want to show you something called the examiner's report. This gets released every year, and often 99% of students won't know about it. It's a resource that's on the AQA website, and whatever exam board you do, it'll be on that website as well. You can get this, you can access this, it's not locked away. You're able to see what the examiners have summed up at the end of each of the exams, and usually there's actually some really, really good hints and tips in there as to what they're looking for from year to year, because sometimes it does change, in terms of looking what they can see from that last set of exams. So from 2019, what have they summed up based on the 2019 exams? This is actually a section from it. In this examiner's report, it was noted that there's nothing on the mark theme that talks about it doesn't give clear definition of how to structure your argument. Okay, so what I'm giving you today is just a few ideas, but there's no marks for doing this, then this, then this. But there are a couple of interesting things on here. They talk about you don't necessarily have to use quotations, but looking at different moments within the text. So if you're struggling to remember a quote, you can refer to a moment within the text. Thinking about how you respond to both the extract and the text as a whole is really important, in terms of how you structure your responses. So if you want to take a look at this, you can Google it. You can pause if you wanted to, take a read through this. There's a really interesting point here where they say the extracts are designed to support. Okay, they're not going to choose an extract where there's nothing to talk about. Okay, they don't want to get in trouble, so they want to make sure you've got loads of stuff to write about. Okay, so if I were you, if you really want to do some stretch and challenge kind of stuff, go have a look at the examiner's reports. It's quite interesting, quite a difficult read, but there are a few things if you want to talk about it with your teacher to have a look at. Okay, so I put this image in because when I'm planning an essay, and when I was at university, for example, if I'm planning an extended piece of writing, I often will start with my table looking like this. It'll be covered with lots of ideas on post-it notes, and I've got to then assemble this into a clear, coherent argument that's got purpose. It's got to, can't be all these disbanded, disjointed ideas, okay, because that won't present my ideas in the best way to the marker. Okay, I need to give them the best chance of giving me good marks. To do that, I've got to structure it in a clear way so that I'm leading them by the hand. Okay, because eventually it's going to be, a very nice formatted piece, but this is kind of where I would generally start. All my ideas be everywhere. Okay. So I'm going to I've never done this before in terms of giving them like labels, but I thought I'd give it a go. I'm going to look at essay structure 1, which I'm going to call the simple structure, essay structure 2, which I'm going to call the chronological structure, and essay structure 3, that should say, the back and forth structure. Okay, this is 1, 2, 2. Okay, so the way we're going to do it then is that we'll go through each one of them individually, and then we're going to have a look at examples for each one. You can see on the right it says introduction, paragraph 1, 2, 3, conclusion. I just want to say now, and I'll say it later on as well, you can have another main body paragraph, so that rather than having 6 in total, you have 7. But I think it's better to focus on having less paragraphs and better depth than having lots and lots of little paragraphs that look super skinny. It's always better to have, in-depth paragraphs. Okay, so we're going to start with essay structure 1, which is the simple structure. So you can start off your introduction with a thesis statement. If you want to know more about that, I've got a video on thesis statements. This is where we're going to respond to the question and set out our argument. Okay, and then in the simple structure, we deal with the extract first. Okay, so we're going to get a quote from the extract, which we'll have a look at in a little bit. Then we're going to look at a quote or moment from elsewhere in the text. Then we're going to look at another quote or moment from elsewhere in the text, and then we're going to introduce a counter argument. And then we have a conclusion, which is basically the same as the introduction. Okay, this is my simplest structure. You can actually, in paragraphs 1 and 2, look at the extract. You don't have to look at the. You might only want to look at one quote from elsewhere in the text if perhaps you really struggle with your memory, and you're struggling to remember other parts of the text to look at. Okay, however, if you revised, I'm sure that you will have at least one moment in the text that you can refer to. Okay, so that's my simple structure. That's the one that I always start off teaching. Deal with the extract, look at maybe 1 to 2 quotes, then look at somewhere else in the text and slot your counter argument in there. Nice and easy. Okay, the chronological structure is referring to putting the moments in the text that you want to refer to in chronological order, in time order. So I'm going to look, for example, at the beginning of the text in paragraph 1, a moment after that, potentially in the middle of the text, and then a moment at the end of the text to show that I am capable of understanding the text as a whole, because the examiner's reports point out they like to see students that are able to show an in-depth understanding of the narrative of the text, not just people that can learn long lists of quotes. It's about understanding the text inside out. Okay, so I've said here that it doesn't matter where the extract is, you just pick one of your paragraphs here to be referring to the extract. So that's why it's really important that you're able to contextualize the extract, because you're actually going to get AO3 context marks for being able to know where the extract comes. which is why the chronological structure is quite a good idea to do. Now that does, require quite a lot of revision in terms of being able to understand the order, but luckily the plot is one of the, the easiest things to revise, just by learning, like revising timelines, for example, using revision cards to practice ordering the text and then rearranging it, for example. Okay, now essay structure 3, not 2. Essay structure 3 I've called the back and forth structure. This is the one that the examiner's reports have, one of the methods that the examiner's reports have highlighted as the most effective. I've kind of put them in difficulty order, I would say. Not to say that you can't get high marks on the simple structure at all, of course you can, but just in terms of as you're progressing, you might want to work your way up from 1 to 3, just giving them giving each of them a different go. Okay, right, so the introduction here is definitely a thesis statement responding to the question with through an argument, not just a simplistic introduction. You're going to expand on this argument from your thesis statement and look at a quote from the text, and you also potentially will make reference to the extract. It's called back and forth because this one you're going to make reference to the extract at different points throughout. Okay, so it's not going to be so it's not going to be so formulaic as say I'm going to look at it in paragraph 1. It's more about I'm going to come back to the extract a couple of times because I know that other areas of the text are really important, and I'm going to that these work in tandem with the extract. It's about looking at that relationship between the extract and the text. I'm going to actually have a look at an example from Macbeth, and that's a really good example, a little bit to do with this. Paragraph 2, we're going to continue expanding. We might potentially refer to the extract again here, acknowledge counter arguments. And then again, expand on the argument, look at a quote from the text, potentially a quote from the extract, acknowledge counters. Okay, this one's actually quite, I would say this is actually quite free flow, the back and forth structure is. But the idea is that you're trying to come back to the extract 2 times in your essay, for example, and it's about being able to this really shows an in-depth knowledge of the text, being able to make those judicious selection of quotes, the best quotes, the best moments in the text, and try to come up with some clever ideas, clever counter arguments. But as I say, I'm going to give you an example in a moment. Okay, right, so then each one then, so I'm going to do an example from A Christmas Carol, Romeo and Juliet, and Macbeth, because I know some of you do Macbeth at school, so I thought we'd have a look at that one, and also it's my favourite of the Shakespearean GCSE texts. Okay then, so simple structure. We'll just go through. Okay then, so this is a question on how is Scrooge presented in the extract and the text as a whole. If you could just pause the video and read through the extract and have a think about how you think he's presented, you might want to have a go at planning it out yourself, for example. You can see that I've given the start of mine. Okay, so feel free to press pause if you want to do that. If not, we'll just carry on. Okay, right, so then Scrooge is presented for me as heartless, isolated, but he's malleable in the text as a whole as well. Okay, so basically malleable means he's able to change. So I'm bringing in what I know about the theme of transformation there. The examiner's reports say that it's good if you can refer, to big ideas, big themes, in the text as a whole. So if you can talk about him being malleable, then refer that to the theme of transformation, which would be super easy to do. Then you're going to get high marks. Okay. So my first one, I'm going to look at him being heartless. I'm going to look at he iced his office in the dog days being the hottest days of summer, and I'm going to talk about how he makes the office cold, metaphorically, for Bob Cratchit, and I'm going to talk about how he's heartless and potentially refer to when he doesn't want to heat the office up as well, and think about how that literally and metaphorically shows that he's heartless. So some nice literal and symbolic analysis there. I've got a video on that if you don't know what that means. Okay, then I'm also going to look at being isolated, so I'm going to look at solitary as an oyster, which is from the extract. But if I want to stretch and challenge myself, I could look at there stood a solitary lighthouse and stayed for 3, and talk about how symbolically the lighthouse is a physical kind of reflection of Scrooge, and how that's the metaphor there is a bit more interesting to unpack than solitary as an oyster, because 9 out of 10 pupils will refer to solitary as an oyster, especially because it's in the extract. So if I want to be trying, as I said earlier, with a simple structure you can get high marks. This isn't prescriptive at all. You don't have to do it like this. You don't have to do it like structures 2 or 3. Just an example. Okay, malleable, I am happy as an angel. I actually picked this one because I think if you have looked at Solitude as an oyster, you can compare these two similes to show how different he is at the start to the simile at the end. And you look at that comparison there, it's quite interesting. And then I'm just going to copy what I said in my introduction, very simple. Okay. Structure 2 then, the chronological structure. More of a difficult question. I've tried to increase the difficulty of the questions as we go along. So if you could just pause the video, you could have a read through. This is taken from just before Mercutio is stabbed by Tybalt. How does the writer present the theme of loyalty in the extract and the text as a whole? I always think that something like loyalty or betrayal is going to come up. I feel like it's just something that is an interesting concept that doesn't really get talked about very much in Romeo and Juliet. So again, as you need to recap, just read through the chronological structure. It's just about getting them in the order that they come in the text. So the writer presents loyalty through the impact of the Montague and Capulet feud. So for example, through Romeo, his loyalty to Mercutio, his disloyalty to Juliet. For example, I might also touch upon the nurse and Friar Lawrence. Again, it's up to whatever you want to explore and also what you know best in the text. Okay, so I'm going to start with the prologue, because for me, these are the two opening words of the text. It's not the two opening words of the text, not Romeo, Juliet. It's not about love. It's about the two families. And so for me, loyalty is presented, from the very beginning, because these two families are having this argument. They're having this ancient grudge to new mutiny, and so it's clear that there's going to be lines of loyalty here, depending on which side you fall on. And so for me, loyalty is something that's very important from the beginning, because the very beginning sets out there's an argument. Whenever there's an argument, you've got to pick a side. Okay, so loyalty is set out from the beginning through the feud, as I said in my introduction. And also, if I refer to from the beginning, I get structural marks there. So for AO2, I'm going to get some kind of technique marks. Okay then, so the next one we look at is from the extract then, because it's coming in order, because the prologue is at the beginning. Now look at the extract. I'm going to look at where Mercutio says, "O calm, dishonourable, vile submission." I'm going to talk about how for Mercutio, Romeo is being dishonourable, being disloyal, because he's backing down to Tybalt and he's not standing up to him. But at this point, Mercutio isn't aware that Romeo is married Tybalt's cousin. So right then, but I'm also going to refer to a quote shortly after the extract that I know, where Romeo talks about how because Mercutio's died, he's now got to kill Tybalt. So either thou or I or both must go with him. So he's saying to Tybalt, we've either you or I or both of us got to die. So in a very short space of time, the loyalty kind of flips. He's no longer loyal to Juliet, and on the other hand, he's now disloyal to Juliet because he wants to go and kill her cousin. Okay, so I'm going to get my counter argument in there and talk about disloyalty. Okay then, so shortly after this, in the same act but in a later scene, we've got the nurse, and she's been very loyal to Juliet and also loyal in terms of her praise of Romeo. And then she again, we kind of see her opinions change very quickly, and suddenly she's like, I think you should get married to Paris. So you can say that she's disloyal to Romeo there. I don't think many students will look at that. Okay, so the last one we look at is meant to be essay structure 2, but it's essay structure 3, so the back and forth structure. So I'm going to look at Macbeth. If you don't know very much about Macbeth, in essence, it's about a Scottish guy that kills his friend who's the king so he can become king. It's filled with loads of violence. Very, very interesting play. Interesting to kind of have a look at in contrast to Romeo and Juliet, actually, because with them both being tragedies, but both very, very different. Okay, then, so how does the writer normalise violence in the extract and the text as a whole? Isn't the usual kind of wording. You wouldn't usually get a question like this. For me, it kind of got almost kind of an A-level kind of feeling this question has. But, you never know. They might, and, they could give you a question like this, because violence is a very important theme in Macbeth. So I'm going to have a look at, in terms of this, I'm going to go back and forth. So I'm going to start off with the extract. I don't have to start with the extract with the back and forth one. It's just because I want to. I'm going to talk about how they normalise violence through Macbeth and the actions of those around him. So I'm going to talk about how, like Valar's minion carved out his passage. We're going to try to get some perceptive points in here. Talk about, carved out. And the idea that he's bravery's minion, and then normalizing violence because they're confusing bravery and violence for me. I can link that to brave Macbeth and talk about the cumulative effect of, you know, valour and brave, for example, and also look at the idea of him physically carving them out. And that's obviously got a lot of violent connotations as well. There's loads and loads and loads we need to look at there. So then after that, I'm going to have a look at I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but only revolting ambition. Talk about again how I think they're confusing, you know, ambition, bravery, and, you know, normalizing violence. And then, you know, I can refer back to the extract there as well, because this very easily carries on from what I've just said, which is exactly what I want to do, because I'm leading the examiner by the hand. And then I'm going to have a look at the usurper's cursed head, where Macduff cuts off Macbeth's head, and at the end, and I'm going to link that back to the extract again and look at, this is actually a really easy way to link it back, is fix his head upon our battlements. So at the beginning, Macbeth has killed a rebel, someone that's going against the king, and put his head on the battlements, and then at the end there's a cyclical structure, because Macbeth has his head put on the battlements as someone that you know, is kind of a secret rebel. Okay, then, so then my conclusion will just match my thesis statement, but you can see how I've continually come back to the extract and done this back and forth structure, because I want to show that, you know, the extract is super important, and there are other moments in the text that link with it, that these aren't these all separate quotes. We're now looking at the interplay of the extract as well as the rest of the play. Okay. So then we've gone through all of that. That was a lot. Final top tips then. I think the main thing is that, you know, you want to put yourself in the examiner's shoes. If they're going home and marking, you know, let's say 30 exam papers after they've been at work, you know, they're going to want you to guide them through it. And then they need you to try and make it as clear as possible. So for me, it's almost like this kind of like you're taking them sort of on this journey to kind of enlighten them at the end of the road, and try and, you know, they want to try and, you know, find out some interesting ideas and interpretation of the question. They want to know your opinions, they want to hear your argument, but they want to hear it in a clear way while you're guided through. My second top tip is that, you know, if you're really struggling, just use the simple structure. It's fine. And then you know, just practice getting the perceptive points in there. Don't forget your counter arguments, don't forget your context, and just try and think of it almost as a checklist. And as soon as, you know, you practice doing it as a checklist, eventually it will become more intuitive and will be easier to plan out. And lastly, please make sure you do plan, because so many people that don't plan end up going off on a tangent, and it gets really frustrating as a marker, because there's so many good ideas, but, you know, it hasn't been finished properly, or you've gone off on one, and I'm, you know, getting confused as I'm reading it. Okay then, fantastic.